Welcome to the Johnson's Controls Facilitates Decarbonization with Oracle Cloud session. To begin this presentation, please join me in welcoming to the stage Phil Hoskins, a partner at KPMG.
All right, hello everyone. Good morning. Looks like we're victim of the craps tables last night. So welcome to this session. Phil Hoskins, a partner with KPMG's industrial manufacturing practice. I have with me on the stage Diane Schwarz, the CIO of Johnson Controls. Hopefully some of you saw in the keynotes yesterday, and then my colleague Brian Mace, our leader in our finance transformation and ESG practice. So Brian and I have been working with Johnson Controls for a number of years and with Diane, and we've been working on a variety of transformation initiatives, including an Oracle Cloud-led ERP program. And that's the context and the backdrop for the discussion this morning. So we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. We're going to cover a variety of topics, but focused on exploring the link between technology, sustainability, and specifically decarbonization. And we're going to talk about Johnson Controls' approach to decarbonization. We're going to talk about some of the underlying technology and the link to the middle and back office systems. Before we get into that, I want to just spend a minute to highlight what the sustainability agenda in the marketplace is, some of the key priorities that we see out there. So organizations as a whole are stating that decarbonization and specifically reducing their carbon footprint is a stated and formal goal at the corporate level. And to achieve that, they're focused on things like energy efficiency and power management and ability to react to the supply chain, to react to climate events, and then reporting is particularly in relation to things like climate disclosures for the SEC. So that's the backdrop of where we're seeing sustainability. But one of the things to note, and the reason why we're talking with Johnson Controls today, is buildings. So buildings is a key part of that sustainability puzzle, with approximately something like 40% of, I think the number is, of annual greenhouse gas emissions are related to buildings and the building ecosystem. And so that's made this buildings particularly a focus for both KPMG and for Johnson Controls in the marketplace. All right, so with that, Diane, would you just talk us through a little bit on Johnson Controls' approach to decarbonization, some of the offerings, and how you tackle it with your clients?
Sure. So you talked a little bit about how buildings are responsible for 40% of the carbon emissions. My hotel room overlooks the roof of the Expo. And I see all of the air distribution and the chillers that are keeping us comfortable. So it just gives you an idea of the energy usage to have the air flowing through and to have it at a comfortable temperature for us is absolutely immense. So we make that equipment. We also make fire detection, suppression, and security equipment too, but you can really see that the chillers and air handling is what is the big consumer of power. And for years, we've had a business in what we call performance infrastructure, right? Managing the efficiency of your building so that you could lower your utility bills. Well, but that really is very symbiotic, because if you're doing that, you are lowering your carbon emissions. So we've really doubled down on what we've been doing all along. We just weren't calling it sustainability. So, but now building out more digital models, and I referenced this a little bit yesterday on stage, our digital to the marketplace. So as we put in sensors where the big equipment is and where it's consuming power, then you can start to do AI on the edge. Do you have vibration going on? Is there some preventative maintenance you need to do? Are there some tweaks in the configuration of controls that you need to do? So that's all part of our open blue suite that's in there in the marketplace. And then we need to tie that to what we do internally from a billing and dispatching technicians and the holistic ecosystem, because it's not enough just to have the sensors out there in the marketplace or the AI. It's like, how do you have humans interact with it or prevent things from happening? So, but I'll also say it's not just about what we are doing in the digital marketplace. We also are rolling out a program to have JCI on JCI, or I'll call it Customer Zero, to have our own products and solutions in our workspaces. We lease a lot of our buildings, so it's not as trivial as a program as you might think. Like, oh, just go install your own stuff. So, but so there's many different layers to how we're approaching sustainability.
And technology is clearly at the core of that. You mentioned yesterday, I think, that JCI, Johnson Controls, is becoming a technology company, not just a manufacturing organization. And so there's this intersection now between operational technology and information technology, where historically, 10, 20 years ago, you probably had building controls, cooling, heating was a separate isolated system, not connected to the broader landscape. But now there's a convergence. So how does that help with decarbonization? How does that all fit together?
Well, certainly we are adopting a cloud-first strategy. So if we can empty our data centers, data closets, we know it's going to consume less. And for us to really have an authentic experience between our digital products and our own internal systems, really need to reduce the tech debt and have more modernization of the system. So the more we roll out IoT and other things in our products, I need to have contemporary systems in the core or on the back end to drive and support all of that. Of course, ERP. Are we here to talk about Oracle ERP? Remind me.
I think Oracle may have a part to play in this year.
So we have grown by acquisition over the last 138 years. Thankfully, I don't have any servers that are 138 years old, but we do have a lot of disparate systems. So by having one cohesive environment that connects to everything, we're going to get rid of, just mountains of underperforming or ill-performing compute power that's out there. So it really is having the cohesive way to run our business on a cloud platform is going to make us more efficient.
So there's a connection point between the external facing, the building technology, and then internal systems like the core platforms like ERP. To your point, we're here to talk about that a little bit. So Brian, can you just elaborate on how did we approach this complex program, particularly in the ERP space, the design and the development?
Yeah, great question, Phil. I mean, as Diane said, an organization like JCI that is global and complex, right? You have to think about the two main factors. One, how do I design something that's going to work for the broader organization? So if you think about the different regions, the different services that JCI offers, the requirements of those groups are very different. So how do I build something at the global level that's going to service all of those different regions and internal customers? And so the design component, and then you have the deployment component. So with deployment is, what are the factors that I need to consider on how I'm going to roll this out globally? As Diane said, right, you have hundreds of ERP systems that you have to strategically think about how you're replacing those. And so when you think about the design element, one of the things that we focused on was the end-to-end process. So how do I start with installation and services, the up-end customer-facing processes, and understand how those processes and activities have an impact on the back office? If we are delivering services, how do we make sure that finance can bill for them? How do we make sure that we're accounting for our time properly? How do we make sure that those upstream activities are properly recorded in your back office and finance function? So that end-to-end picture, I think, is paramount to making sure that you get this right. And then it's working with a strong governance team around how you build that global design, right? You're not going to build something that's going to work for everyone. You have to determine what elements can be global, and then work on, once you establish that global core, how do you build in the localization elements as you roll this out? So you're going to have different regulatory requirements in Asia than you do in North America. That's going to be a component of your design, but it's a design at the local level, not at the global level. And I think that's, an important factor.
So I'll say that even our definition of end-to-end has changed, right?
That's absolutely right.
When you started the journey, before I was there, it was kind of typical of customer calls, If something's wrong, send a technician, or a sale happened, we're going to install. But now that we have these digital solutions, which really weren't fully formed when we began this journey, we need to think about what is the trigger of, say, a service event that happens from our digital product suite. And so that's where you really see that interaction between the IoT and the digital to the core. So end-to-end has become, well, really circuitous, but the scope has expanded a lot from when we began our journey.
And so the lines between the functions have become a bit more blurred as that journey's gone on. It's become more connected. And it's no longer easy just to say, this is a discrete process and I'm just going to build it and put it in ERP and I'm done.
Well, and the boundaries of the ERP have expanded, right? So when you look at the Oracle toolset, you're not just looking at your core GL or your finance function, you're really bringing in those other modules and applications to make sure that the information and data is shared on that end-to-end journey.
And so that's a good segue to talk about the partnership with Oracle. So some of these products are still evolving, as we know, and we're going to hear about it today more. So how have you partnered with Oracle on this journey, Diane? Can you talk a bit about that?
So first, if you go back to the original agreement, which I inherited, but it was bold and said, we're going to go big, we're going to commit for a long time, we're going to take away choice and saying, we are going to implement on this platform and stop looking left to right and other options. This is what we're going to do because we really want an enterprise first strategy. But when you are going to be on a platform for a long time, it's really important that you have those core relationships. So reaching out to Oracle, making sure that we have a strong executive sponsor and that we have regular governance with them on these things don't work, these things need to be put on the roadmap, and engaging their team as well on some of the architecture decisions that we have to have. So it really has taken us a village to get here, but we work almost every day on improving the relationship with Oracle to make sure that their product is as fully functioning, as mature as we will need it to be when we get to that part of our deployment.
It's kind of a long-term, the journey term is used a lot, but a long-term relationship as the products evolve and as your own tools evolve. This is an ongoing process.
You know, the depreciable life of a project like this is typically 10 years. But we all know, right? It's going to outlast me and everyone else on my team. These systems will probably be in place for 30 years before somebody else has the gravitas to replace it.
Right, and then some of the benefits of the cloud solutions is that they're constantly iterating anyway, so you never really have the end of the asset. It's an evolving asset. So with that, Brian, we talked a bit about the technology side of this and the process integration and how it works for the business. Can you just talk a bit about other benefits that we see on big programs of this nature? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you know, the key here, right, and the topic of this discussion is how does the Oracle platform help enable, you know, the business element, JCI, better serve their customers. And so I don't think, you know, that's indisputable that by giving them, you know, a better platform to serve on and the ability to invoice and do the things that they need to do in a dynamic manner helps, you know, your business-facing customers. But there are also inherent benefits to the back office itself. And so one, I mean, cost. I'm sure your current ERP platforms cost money, right? You have a lot of them, you have to maintain them. So there's an element of migrating that cost or eliminating that cost as you move to the cloud, right? You're going from hundreds of disparate systems to a solidified platform. You have the process standardization that comes with this type of transformation. So we are looking at hundreds of different ways of working across the various regions, across the various businesses, and trying to determine what is the standard or most efficient way to deliver those same processes or services in the cloud. And so you gain some efficiency. You also have effectiveness. You have better control of the information and data. And then once you standardize, you now have the ability to maybe reposition that work. So if I think about what things can I leverage out of the inherent capabilities of the cloud platform, I get greater automation, I get the ability to not have to do manual interfaces or some of the things that finance has to focus on today, and I can reposition that talent elsewhere. And so there's a, the cost benefit component. I think there's a people benefit component, which is our lives and jobs get a little bit easier because there is a better user interface. I'm not playing in spreadsheets all day, hopefully, and doing the transfer of data from legacy system to legacy system. And then there's the efficiency component. So I think the last piece here, and the one that isn't necessarily measured, but I do think it's an emerging value driver, is when you think about the overall impact of those on-prem systems, there's a component of decarbonization that JCI will get out of turning those systems off or closing those data closets and kind of eliminating the electricity and consumption that's caused by those systems.
So there's hundreds or thousands of components that I'm going to be able to take out of my ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right? So as we go for a cloud-first strategy, that's changed our whole network approach. We haven't really talked about this, but I still have a traditional network needed for those on-prem apps that are buried in closets elsewhere. So I'll be able to have a leaner network as we go. I'll need fewer backup systems, and let's not talk about the age of some of the backup systems we have, but it just gives you an idea of the simplicity of the solution that you can go with by just, again, going to the cloud, single platform. Okay, maybe not one instance, but close. Of all of the different complexities will move out. I will just do one little aside. We were talking about a system or a process that we are modernizing. We talked about yesterday, and somebody on the team asked, well, so what system are we going to retire when we do that? You know what the answer was? Excel.
I don't think Excel ever gets retired, does it?
Ever, yeah.
So can we dig in a little bit to the notion of moving things to the cloud and how it helps with emissions? So we talk about, I think, for anyone who's familiar with the Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, like the direct emissions from Scope 1 is probably where some of the infrastructure now is sitting, and then the Scope 3 emissions, which is more about vendors and suppliers in your broader ecosystem. So there's a shift, I assume, Brian, of where the emissions are coming from, but also a reduction.
Absolutely, right? So we focused on how JCI is helping their customers decarbonize, right? With what they're doing in the smart buildings and the ability to manage, your temperature controls, electricity consumption. But when you think about, as Diane said, the on-prem systems that they have today, there is associated carbon with those systems. And there's a lot of varying studies out there. We've done our own at KPMG, other leaders have done it, that say anywhere between 40 to 90%, I've seen, reduction in carbon by moving from a legacy on-prem platform to the cloud. And the reason there's such a broad range is it varies by company. You have to think about where you're getting your electricity today. There's a component of green cloud versus brown cloud. There's the component of your on-prem electricity. If you're actually getting it from a green source, then maybe you're not getting that great of a benefit. But the point that you mentioned around the different scope elements, we're in an environment right now where there are proposals both in the EU and the US around having organizations have to disclose their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And so there's a scramble out there outside of the commitments that organizations have made, and quite frankly, a lot of bold commitments, right? Companies have said, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050. Understanding what the path is to get there, every little bit helps. And so when you think about taking all of the electricity associated with Scope 2 to run all of those platforms and servers, and I can now transition that to a provider like Oracle that has made commitments that their servers are going to run on green energy, and they're going to commit to certain recycling rates, I think we say on here, around what they do with their technology and their services. But that allows an organization like JCI to, one, eliminate a lot of the Scope 2 elements, and then transfer the other component to Scope 3. and which isn't something that you would have to disclose unless you've made commitments in that space. So there's a multifaceted kind of win-win situation here where you're able to reduce the burden of what you're maintaining today, and then you're also able to leverage your partner like Oracle that is going to commit to making sure that what you're buying from them is aligned with what the goals you're trying to achieve as an organization. And so that's, I think one of the things that is going to allow JCI to kind of gain some additional benefits from that. And then whether you quantify those or take credit for those, that comes down to like at what level you're measuring or planning as an organization, and that's going to vary across the businesses.
Yeah, so today I don't have a choice as to where I'm consuming power.
That's right.
Right? I have a plant in a suboptimal location or a few hundred suboptimal locations, and there's only one choice of where to get power, likely not green power, and where we're going to get that. But that Oracle, as well as other hyperscalers, are being very strategic about where they're placing their data centers and how they're putting together the entire power and carbon solution for that. I can't possibly be as effective as they are. Even if I decided that I was going to have my own data center, or even just going with a colo and having a private cloud, it's never going to be as efficient as where they're designing. And so how some of this comes full circle, I talked about the chillers that we make. Well, we're in the data center business, and we provide a bunch of the equipment to cool data centers. And so we see the basis of design that they're putting in, which then comes back to us and say, from where they are putting it in the world and how they are operating it, yes, we can provide the building solutions equipment, but running an entire data center and being as effective with the power, that is the business of Oracle and the other hyperscalers. But I, as a CIO, can't possibly come any close, nor would I have the technical team to be able to manage that. It hasn't been our specialty, and don't see that it's going to be a core strength.
Got it. So there seems to be a whole series of benefits, potentially not completely measurable yet, of moving to the cloud as it relates to emissions. But as this matures, we think about ESG reporting. Brian, you mentioned the SEC, climate disclosures. So there's a mandate now that organizations need to start measuring better and reporting. Can you double click on that? Just on how does the ERP system and this Oracle story fit into the ecosystem for ESG reporting?
Yeah, it's an evolving topic, and it's one that organizations are struggling with daily, right? So if you think about the traditional reporting that we do as an organization on the financial side, it's in a controlled environment. We know where that information comes from. It's typically in our ERP. We get feeds from some of our operational or sales systems that drive that accounting. But we, for years, have put fiduciary oversight on that, things like SOX controls, so that we're comfortable with reporting and disclosing that information. We're now in the environment where we have to put that same oversight and control over non-financial data. And the issue with that is that non-financial data exists everywhere. Depending on the type of organization, when you look at JCI's footprint, we talked about end-to-end before. If you think about how many service trucks they have on the road or how many buildings they own or lease themselves, having to collect and aggregate that information to make sure that it's complete and accurate and then be able to report on it is no easy task. And so the more that you could standardize your technology footprint, the more that you can get that information into a more manageable environment, like a few instances of your ERP or other types of tools like your procurement tools or HR applications that have this in a centralized location and it's easy to access, the easier that reporting element is going to be for a company. And when you think about what's after reporting, and this is the piece that I get passionate and excited about, is you can't manage what you can't measure. And so the reporting component and the measurement component is just the first piece. And so I need to know where I am. I need to know how to report on my Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions. I need to know what levers are available in my organization to reduce those emissions. And if I can't accurately report on it, I'm not going to be able to manage it. And so when I think about the commitments that companies have made and looking out 30 years from now, how are you going to achieve that goal? If you're not even reporting on those numbers today, how can you say you have a plan to get there? And so the first conversation I typically have with finance leaders and other leaders in an organization, because this isn't only a finance problem, right? We need IT on board, we need operations on board. If you think about, we've made a commitment that's 10 or 15 years out, what is your revenue going to be in 10 or 15 years? What are your operations going to be in 10 or 15 years? Organizations, when you think about a strategic plan, it's 3 to 5 years. Like, we're not looking out past that horizon. And so if I can't tie it to operational levers on how we're going to decarbonize my business based off of what I'm producing or what I'm selling or the amount of teams that are on the road, that's going to be a very big problem for finance and other team leaders to kind of solve over the next 10 or 15 years.
And shall I point out that the average life on something like a chiller can be 30, 40 years? So well beyond the 3 to 5 year strategic life. So there will be future generations grappling with this if we don't solve it now.
And those, if you think about just the timeline to replace something like that, the capital investments that are needed, if you're not embedding this into your strategy now or your business decisions now, there's going to be a wall that comes up that says, wow, I really have to react fast. I need to do something dramatic in order for me as an organization to meet the commitments that we've made. And so I think the next 5 years are going to be very interesting when the check starts coming due on a lot of these commitments that organizations have made and what they're going to do to get there. Because there's a disconnect between if I read a financial statement or I read a proxy statement and it says we're going to grow our revenue by 5x over the next 5 years, but we're also going to decarbonize by 10x. Like, there's a lot that would have to happen for both of those dynamics to work.
Right, and so what I'm hearing as well is the data and having quality data, the right governance around it is going to be key to that reporting. Outside of just the ERP, but it starts with the ERP. So if we've kind of covered the data, the reporting, Excel, which may well be a solution in this space, and the technology. But can you talk a little bit about, Diane, the people side of this? So when it comes to sustainability in IT particularly, how do you set up an organization to help with this decarbonization goal within technology?
So it first started for me with mapping out the IT relationships to our business stakeholders. So we have a chief sustainability officer now. And it won't be too far into the future before every major org has a chief sustainability officer. Call it 2 years, call it 5 years. It's going to happen. So I needed to assign someone to that. Now I just picked a high potential leader and said, "Go figure this out." He said, "Thanks, boss. I appreciate the development opportunity." But I also have someone who is aligned with our digital products area and have the two of them working together. Because, as I said, we make products in this space. We are lowering the carbon emissions for our customers. We need to do it for ourselves. And so it's a holistic solution that we need to solve for, and I just don't mean the platform. So we are actually developing a team internally to go and understand how we need to be reporting on this internally. What tools are we going to use? How are we going to support our own products internally and really be that customer zero? So our talent strategy on this is evolving every week as we figure it out, but it kind of goes along with your same message. If you don't start now, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, somebody's going to pay a big price, maybe even from a compliance perspective, right? Yeah. These metrics will likely be things that will be published and auditable, and the SEC wants to make sure that we're all accountable for this. Well, if we don't have the teams to support that, everyone's going to come back and be looking at us. So the answers aren't there yet, but we need teams who are nimble enough to be asking the questions kind of, all throughout the organization on where we need to be heading.
And presumably the leader who was very appreciative of getting his or her new job will have the task as well of figuring out how do you drive the cultural change to get decarbonization from within technology and out, things like performance measures. Because if you're reporting to the street in your climate disclosures, then you better have some incentives internally to actually drive that, which means the annual performance measures start to become less about efficiency and dollars, and there's some element of sustainability, although I think as an industry we probably haven't figured out what those measures would be at the personnel level. So it's a constantly evolving space, it sounds like.
So our Chief Sustainability Officer is really in the driver's seat on defining that, and we look to her as our muse, and then in what we need to do to support her. I mean, she wrote a lot of the legislation years ago, so we can't possibly catch up intellectually with what we know she brings to the table.
Great.
It's an organizational problem, right? Like the fact that companies are committing to putting leaders in that space, that leader is there to rally the rest of the business onto that journey. And without having that direction or insight, I think companies are going to struggle with, one, making sure that they are making that lasting change and meeting the commitments that they made. But the bigger element here is, how do you embed this into things like decision making or things like performance management? Because we're getting to a point where how we view success or progress across our business units or things is going to be a little different, right? It's not only going to be that financial metric. You're going to have sort of that balanced scorecard component that says, yes, this chiller or product may be profitable, but it doesn't bode well for my customers on how efficient it is. And so do I want to offer that to customers? Or, when you think about whether we expand to a new market or release a new service, there may be an ROI there, but what is the impact of that ROI on my carbon score? Or how does this have an impact on my rating score or those things? And so thinking through what those tangible drivers are and how you can connect ESG metrics to your common standard operational or financial performance metrics is that next element of really making sure that this gets ingrained in the business. And I think your organization is offering services, so it's an opportunity too, because companies have to move the ball. They have to decarbonize, and by buying a more efficient chiller or having a product like OpenBlue that will give me visibility into all of my buildings and understand what are the levers that I can pull to reduce energy consumption or make sure, raise the temperature by 1 degree and what that impact is on my score, I think is a very powerful tool for large organizations to get access to that data and to be able to do things with it, right? Make those better business decisions.
Perfect. So I think we're almost at time. We covered a lot of ground there, and I know this is an evolving topic, but we've got maybe time for a couple of questions if anyone in the audience has any. So we've got a microphone. If anyone have a topic, put your hand up. Yeah, go ahead. And if you want to just grab that microphone right there, that should work, yeah.
Being that you've decided to go for sustainability in your offices as well as your customers, have you looked into kind of going with LEED certifications and going really further into that and doubling down so that you can market that you are not only doing that internally, but you can help your customers do that?
So when we have a new building that we move into, there's more certifications beyond LEED that we look to. So it is part of the overall ecosystem. We are in some of the flagship buildings across the world and some really cool sustainability projects. But we also have hundreds of sites that we're not going to be able to move in that direction with. So it's really only as we move forward. Now you can answer that from the partnership that you have with many of your customers, because
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a component, right? It's one of those considerations around what levers do you have, right? So a lot of organizations, if you're in a long-term lease, do you have the ability to, push on the building owner, right, to drive some more sustainable practices, to adopt some of the JCI technology that would get you, into those lead categories? If you are an organization that owns buildings, right, that is an absolute way that you could, show your commitment or invest, capital to make sure that you're bringing those buildings along the journey and getting that certification. But I think it's just one element of it. There's the LEED certification is a great way to, show that commitment and show the things that you've done. But there are, other things underlying it that help drive that strategy.
And that is its own business in terms of the certification and the consulting. It's not one that we currently are in.
Okay. One more quick one. Are you using PPM internally, or are you using it for client projects as well?
We are using it to manage the installation of client projects, if that's I think that's your question. Yeah, we are baking that into our overall end-to-end design that Brian talked about.
Okay, I'll just come down here. Thank you. Can you talk more? You talked about end-to-end processes. Can you talk more about, like manufacturing and your supply chain and how you did that with ERP? And was it like a big bang, just like the timeline on how it worked? Like, did you roll it out by regions, et cetera? Because I think, and where do you draw the line, right? Because I think, we're working with this ourselves, right, to kind of make the scope manageable.
So I've been in role for 2 years, and my predecessor developed the ERP strategy before I came. And our strategy is a dual ERP one. So we are going big on Oracle, but I'm going medium on someone else. So for our manufacturing sites, that is a different ERP strategy. The Oracle solution is really for what we call our field services. So it really installing and servicing all of our products across the world. So, but if you look at the life cycle, yes, we have here where we make it, but supporting those customers over their life, which is going to go decades, that's the piece, that's the Oracle side. So we really call it our field solutions business. And in terms of how we are sequencing the rollout, that does change. Acquisitions and divestitures change that. We had a pilot in Europe, and we have a pilot in North America, and we continue to build that out. We are building it out by product line, and we're building it out by geography, but that depends. So the rollout strategy in North America is different than it is in Europe, because Europe has way more ERP systems and languages and countries. So it's a very different kind of sequencing between the two. I wish I had the magic answer on that, because I also have some really old systems. So I'm trying to reduce my tech debt and reduce that risk, but the sequencing of that isn't always in line with where we need to go with the business strategy. So it's a clumsy dance.
It's always the challenge between the technology risk and the business risk, right? And there are things that you absolutely have to replace by a certain date because of the life cycle that it's in, or whether it's going to be able to be maintained. And then it's, how do you measure that, or how do you compare that to what the business impact would be of replacing those tools? And then you always have that third component, which is the balance of value. And so what value can you get when? So are there things that if you're looking to achieve a bigger business case or to drive more business value that you want to accelerate in your timeline? You're weighing IT risk, business risk, and then when you get value through your deployment lifecycle.
The subtle art of program governance.
It's an art, not a science.
But I think it's fair to say as well that the connection between that manufacturing side of the business and the services business is more and more connected, where perhaps in the old world you could deploy a site pretty easily in an isolated way, and now there's all these other considerations when you go to a site of what it's connected to. The ecosystem of edge applications has proliferated massively. So I think that the deployment considerations that perhaps you're alluding to have got a little bit more complicated in today's world, and particularly in the Johnson Controls environment that we've been working in. All right, any more questions? One last question.
I have a question for ESG. What sort of data you are getting out of Oracle, and what tool you use from Oracle to report for ESG? I'm not very clear on that.
Yeah, so we're not far enough in our deployment journey to really be reporting on that data from a full-scale ESG perspective. You might have a better idea on what other customers are doing.
Yeah, so ESG is a broad topic, right? So when you think about the easiest ones to kind of think through, the S and the G components exist in your HCM applications today. I need to be able to report on my global headcount, and I need to have that headcount split up in certain ways, right? What's my gender diversity? What's my pay scale? What are the number of managers that I have at certain levels across the organization? That all exists in a controlled environment. So when you think about what you report for your social metrics or what goes into your sustainability report, a lot of that information can come directly from those controlled applications, or an ERM application where you've documented what your enterprise risks are and where your climate risks are. Where it gets a lot more difficult and less specific, because it's dependent on the organization and the industry, is on the climate side. And so you do have certain elements in the ERP today around spend. So if you think about, what am I spending on electricity? What am I spending on fuel? You can capture additional data elements in your procurement applications or in your ERP to get megawatt hours or to get gallons, or have that standard calculation that says this amount of spend, knowing what the average fuel rate is in my locations. I can come up with how much we spent on these products and back into like what my carbon calculation is. There are other elements, depending on the industry, that are outside of the ERP, and I think a lot of organizations are struggling whether you pull that non-financial data into an ERP so that you can report on it, or if you use something like an EPM solution that you're more comfortable with bringing in operational data to help facilitate that reporting. And so when you look at the marketplace right now, every major player has said they have a solution for ESG reporting. I haven't seen the silver bullet that solves everything. And most of the conversations that I have with clients now is focused on the best tool is the tool that you already have, right? Figure out a way to leverage EPM, figure out a way to leverage your current reporting tools to get that information that's probably disparate within your organization, and instead of going out and trying to buy something new. Yeah.
So, since you moved all your data centers somewhere else, so did you evaluate how much CO2 gas you have saved, and did you get a carbon credit for that?
So we have not, because we are still going through the journey. So so we haven't reported against that success.
It's something that I think is an emerging value driver. So when you think about organizations that are looking at what's the value I'm going to get from moving to the cloud, right? We typically look at cost savings, we look at productivity savings, things like that. This is a new lever that you can build into your value cases, where if you can calculate what you're spending today on your servers and on the on-prem systems, you could, leveraging, Oracle has metrics on their website right now that talk about, how many kilowatt hours of carbon, their servers are producing. And so you could, it's not an easy task, but you can calculate it for your organization and then determine what that savings is going to be. And I feel like that is an additional value lever that we're going to be, putting in some of our clients' business cases.
I'll also say that our manufacturing units, we know that their consumption overshadows some of the consumption that we would have in IT. So we're really focusing on those big numbers,
right,
as opposed to our own in terms of what we're having to report and measure at a finite level.
pick your battles. Right?
Yeah, right.
All right, so we're at time. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening in. Thank you, Diane and Brian, for spending time with us, and enjoy the rest of the CloudWorld sessions. Thank you.